Okay, recording. I'm Councillor Alice MacDonald, so I'm the Cabinet Member for Equalities, Neighbourhoods and Leisure, and that includes responsibility for the Southwark Stands Together programme. So I was asked tonight to talk a bit about the programme and our commitment within it. I guess I just wanted to start with Windrush Day, which is obviously the reason why we're all here. Southwark, as everybody knows, is an incredibly diverse borough, and we are home to many people of the Windrush generation. And that generation made a huge contribution to Southwark, just like they did across the country. We've already heard about Sam King, the first Black Mayor of Southwark, and there are so many more in our community who are doing brilliant work. Last week I was meant to visit the Walworth Golden Oldies. Unfortunately, I am self-isolating, but I know they support many members of the Windrush generation and are a great example of community action. And I know there are a huge amount more of that kind of activity. And I think as a council, sometimes we have a challenge to know where those networks are, what work is going on. So I guess one of my asks is to tell me and connect with me and help us be a better council. So just to reflect on the Windrush scandal, I think when I was reading about it, Wendy Williams in her report really called for migration and broader policy to be about people and rooted in humanity. And the treatment of the Windrush generation is a clear example of how the government has failed in that. And the hostile environment immigration policy, as John has said, has had devastating impacts on so many citizens, especially Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities. I think one of the things when I was reading the report that Wendy Williams said was, it said, let's look beyond explaining Windrush as an unlucky series of mistakes, but recognise it as an historical series of events embedded in current and past structures, policies and cultures. And I think that's just really important because, Windrush is a very, very big example of the kind of discrimination and racism that still exists. And that kind of leads me on to Southwark Stands Together. So the murder of George Floyd last year obviously brought into stark relief the inequalities, racism and discrimination that so many people still face, including right here in Southwark. And Southwark Stands Together was the programme that was launched in response to that murder. It was led by Councillor Johnson Seaton, who some of you might know. It began with listening exercises, which were attended by more than 1,500 people. 70% of respondents at those events said they had experienced racial discrimination in the last 12 months in the main places in employment and education. And that stat probably doesn't shock lots of people on this call, even though it is shocking in itself. So part of that programme was, hearing, a huge part of it was hearing from communities, and there's still a lot of work to do on that within Southwark. We also looked at the data and we kind of heard a lot of the statistics again and again, and a lot of those have been exacerbated by COVID. So whether it is worse health inequalities, that Black, Asian, minority ethnic people are more likely to be in low paid or insecure employment or to be excluded from school. So the start of the programme was really building an even more thorough picture of what is the kind of picture in Southwark for our communities. And then the programme was really about looking at ourselves as a council, but also what we can do together across the borough. And there were 6 specific themes where we focused on action: employment and business, education, health, culture, communities, the relationship with the police, public realm and our own council workforce. So we agreed anti-racist pledges, which we've committed to as a council, and asked others to do the same. We also announced £300,000 last year to support, this year to support different actions. We're coming up to the kind of one in Cabinet in a few weeks, and we were looking at it today. We were publishing a very comprehensive report of what has happened. I think it's important that we kind of figure out how do we use that 1 year on as an opportunity to talk to different communities and understand again, how they felt and how they feel right now, because that is the point of this kind of programme, understanding people's lived experiences, not just looking at lots of stats and facts. I guess to pull out a couple of areas to give you some kind of tangible examples of what the programme has done so far. One has been working to increase representation of Black, Asian, minority ethnic people at senior management level in the council. There has been an increase, even though it's small, there's still a lot of work to do in that area. Working with schools to tackle exclusion, working on the relationship with police. There's a youth independent advisory group that's been set up. In my area, we are doing a review of our grants. I know Dave on the call from Community Southwark's been involved in that, and the Reach Alliance and others, to look at what are the barriers to communities to access those, and we'll be looking at community spaces too. I think one of the things I also wanted to mention is, I learned a lot preparing for today and reading about Windrush. When I look back to being in school, I think, I didn't learn anything about Windrush at school. I must have studied the Tudors and the Victorians about 5 times, but nothing about colonialism, immigration until I went to university. And I think it's really important that we understand and learn from our history. And one of the commitments we've got for the year ahead is to take forward plans for a Black Cultural Centre. The location and focus of that is yet to be confirmed, because we really want to work with communities to shape that, and we'll be kind of setting out how we'll do that in the next few weeks, to really make sure that plays the role that everybody wants it to play. And I think I wanted to end with Windrush, because today should and is a day of celebration, but I think too many people are living in uncertainty because of the failures of the compensation scheme. One of our commitments within our borough plan is campaigning on the Windrush compensation scheme. And one of the things we did today, I know some of you on the call signed the letter as well, was write to the Home Secretary, with our 3 MPs joined in, our Assembly member, and also 20 community organisations across Southwark, to ask her to tell us, how many people have applied for and received compensation in Southwark, how many have received correct documentation, and also calling for support and funding for legal services. Because I think part of the challenge we have is we don't even have the data. The government doesn't publish it at local authority level, so it's really hard to understand what the picture actually is. And that's why events like this, I think, are really important to hear from all of you about what is the reality lots of people are facing. And I really welcome, it's great to have Southwark Law Centre and the Windrush Justice Clinic network being set up to support people, and we have to make sure that the funding is there to support you to do that work effectively. So as a council, we'll do what we can do to support, and I hope we can continue campaigning together, especially towards the government, to both right the wrongs of history but create a better environment for people. I think, change doesn't happen overnight. We all know that. No one's kind of pretending we're going to eradicate racism and discrimination through this programme. But it is, I think, how can we all work together? What is our individual roles, and what can we do together to challenge it? And about some of that, I think, is about doing things differently, admitting when we do get things wrong, trying not to get them wrong in the first place, but being more determined and resolved than ever before to work together to kind of eradicate discrimination in all its forms. So yeah, I think I'll stop there, but thank you for the invitation. I'm looking forward to the rest of the discussion, and I can put a link in the chat to the letter that we sent out today as well. It's very hard when you finish. Anyway, she'll take silence.
Thank you. I wasn't even speaking. I was struggling to unmute myself. So thank you so much for that. I mean, it's that sort of breadth of activity is, I mean, it's a wonderful ambition, and it's an ambition which I suppose those of us working and have been living in Southwark for some time wish you, I mean, we want to do everything we can to help support that activity, and know that the council has over many years. I mean, I'm involved with the Law Centre, but I'm also involved with the Day Centre for Asylum Seekers, and that kind of ongoing sort of support from the council is unfortunately rarer than it should be. And so it's great to know that these initiatives keep coming. Can I just ask if anybody has got a really urgent question to ask of you, Councillor MacDonald, can they do so now? But otherwise, I'd encourage people to wait until we get into the discussion in about half an hour's time. Is that all right? But do put up a hand if there's something that's important. No? Well, again, thank you for that. It's impressive the number of signatures that you've got on the letter that has gone to the Home Office. Let's hope that we get a decent reply. We live in hope. Can I now turn to David? David Reid. As you mentioned, Councillor MacDonald's the Reach Alliance is an important part of the work, and perhaps David can turn to you to say more about what you're doing and the plans.
Thanks very much, John. Good evening, everyone. And I can see some of you, and I can see some of your names, but I know you're all there, so that's really good. So when Sally asked me to come and say a few words on this special occasion, Windrush 22nd of June, Sally put me down as to speak about Southwark Reach Alliance, and I am going to talk about Southwark Reach Alliance, but I'm not going to start off with Southwark Reach Alliance. So I'm going to start off. I'd like to share a personal story with you. It's a story of how I got my freedom pass in 1977. Yes, you heard right. How I got my freedom pass in 1977. I was born in Jamaica in 1962, Montego Bay. Montego Bay is the 4th largest city in Jamaica. And for those of you who don't know Jamaica, it's a beautiful place. It's hot, it's sunny, with temperatures averaging 80 degrees Fahrenheit all year round. It has over 50 beaches, including a magical 7 Miles beach called Negril. We Jamaicans are famous for our cooking skills. No one leaves Jamaica without enjoying one of our main dishes, jerk chicken and rice and peas, and then wash it down with a shot of white rum. Jamaica is also the birthplace of reggae music and of course, James Bond. I might be a little bit biased with my love of Jamaica, but 4 million tourists visited our island in 2019. So you make up your mind. I arrived in England in 1964. I was 2 years old. My grandmother was already living in England, and my father joined us a few months later. We lived in various places in Southwark, so I've got a strong connection with Southwark. And we rented rooms in other people's homes, like most people from the Caribbean did at that time, until we finally bought our home in Lusan Road in Peckham. Lusan Road is sort of towards the middle end of Queen's Road, if you know Queen's Road quite well. And I grew up there with my sister, my younger sister. I attended Kenda Primary School in Lewisham between 1969 and 1974. My secondary school education was in Southeast London Comprehensive School in Deptford. There I developed a real big passion for cricket, and I went on to represent my school at county level, playing for Kent Cricket Club, under 15 and under 16 teams. So Kent is actually a professional cricket outfit. If those who follow cricket, you'll know that. I stayed on till the 6th form and left school with 5 GCSEs, all A to C passes, 1 CSE. So if you're old enough, we used to have an exam called a CSE, grade 1. So that was an equivalent to an O-level, grade C, and 2 A-levels. So Mum, she was really proud of me. My teenage years after I left school was really up and down, like a lot of teenagers, especially if you were like me, black. I had a few part-time jobs which didn't really last long. And at that time was in early 1980s, period of severe recession in the UK, which resulted in high unemployment, and jobs only came to you if your face fitted, if you know what I mean. I eventually went on, I got a place at North East London Polytechnic. At those times, they were polytechnics, and then a few years after that, they changed to universities. And I studied a sociology degree, but for personal reasons, I didn't finish the course, and Mum wasn't happy about, that decision. Moving on to 1985, I started a career in community work. I was a community development worker, and I started working for an organisation called the West Indian League. Now, the West Indian League was based off of Lordship Lane, a road called Pellet Road. So if you know Lordship Lane very well, there's a police station there. I think it's still there. But if it's not there, the building is still there. And Pellet Road runs along that side. So that's where I started my community development work. By 1987, I was a father of 2 children. 1988, I decided to enroll in a 3-year youth and community development work course at Avery Hill College, which is now called Greenwich University. I graduated in 1991 with sort of top marks on that professional certificate course. And Mum this time was happy, you know, proud of me. And I remember she saying to me, you know, all my hard work and sacrifices she had made working, you know, in England, in the cold and the misery of the weather. And you know, you've got a professional certificate and you can take that anywhere in the world. Over the next 20 years, I moved from community development to supporting charities and not-for-profits in developing their organizations. So that's what I'm doing now at Community Southwark. So during all that time that I've just described, I'd achieved good GCSEs, 2 A-levels, a professional certificate. I'd obeyed the law. I'd paid all my taxes. Wouldn't you say I was a nice example of a good citizen? The Windrush scandal began to surface in 2017. After it emerged, hundreds of West Indians, just like myself, who were from the Windrush generation, had been wrongly detained, deported, denied their legal rights to defend themselves. By 2018, this all exploded into one of the biggest political embarrassments and disgrace the British government has ever had to handle in immigration. 1977, the post arrived at my address and there was a letter, it marked David Reed. It had on there a government stamp. It's about an A4 size. I opened the letter and I looked on the certificate. There was a certificate inside there. And it said, my name in the middle, David Reed. And on the top, it had British citizenship. This was my British citizenship. And at the time, I didn't know that was going to be my freedom pass, my British citizenship. My family hadn't acted quickly so I could get my citizenship. Maybe I wouldn't be here telling you this story today. Those 50 years that I've just described, myself being in the UK, passing those exams, would not have meant nothing. Being in the right side of the law, like I was, wouldn't have meant anything. Having my family here wouldn't have meant anything. Paying my taxes, because I worked, to this government, it wouldn't have meant anything. The only thing that mattered to the British government was my freedom pass. That's my personal story just shared with you. My work at Community Southwark is helping Black and ethnic minority community organisations to have a stronger voice and representation on things that matter to their communities, things that affect their lives. The principle of my work is to promote equality and fairness, to try and prevent injustices, just like the Windrush scandal, from happening. One of the networks that I work with, and this is now I'm coming onto the Southwark Reach Alliance, so this is the sort of highlight of what I've got to say. It's called the Southwark Reach Alliance. So REACH stands for Race, Equality and Cultural Heritage. The network's purpose, why it's actually set up, is to challenge systemic racial barriers whilst empowering Black and minority ethnic communities to flourish. And the way we plan to do this is over the next 12 months is to focus on 3 areas: health and inequalities, the criminal justice system, young people, employment and enterprise. So that's young people with a specific focus on employment and enterprise. And developing a plan of action which is going to identify what are the structural barriers that are getting in the way of Black and minority ethnic communities to overcome some of the issues that they face in those areas that we're focusing on. Just to finish off, many of those organizations in the network are led by people living in Southwark who are from West Indian heritage. And it's ironic that still after 70 years from when the Windrush Empire landed in the Tilbury docks, West Indians, along with other communities, are still fighting for equality and fairer treatment. If you want to know more about Southwark Reach Alliance and its work, please email me, david@communitysouthwark.org, communitysouthwark.org. Thanks.
David, thank you. Thank you for that. It's a very powerful reminder. And as you say, here we are 70 years on, and it's still a pretty poor story. Sorry, I mean yours. And as you say, I mean, in an ideal world, there wouldn't be a need to reach, but there is. And thank you for making it happen. And I hope we'll be able to be sort of fully involved in the ongoing work along with the Justice Clinic. Can I now turn to Pamela and Kathy? Well, I leave you, if I may, to both sort of introduce yourselves, but I think you're known to nearly everybody that now sort of is on the screen here. Pamela, whilst you're from the Greenwich Housing Rights, I think that you're really here this evening as a Southwark resident and as a member of the advisory group, which has been so important in helping establish this initiative. So can I turn over to you before I start taking any more of your lines? You're on mute.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me? Okay. Right. My name is Pamela Rowbotham. I've been a Southwark resident for over 30 years. I went to school in Southwark. My child was educated in the borough. So today I'm speaking to you as a Southwark resident, but also as a member of the Windrush Justice Clinic, which is a new organisation set up to assist people making claims for compensation as a result of this Windrush scandal. When I was asked to do this talk, I first thought what I would do is introduce you to the Windrush generation and also give you an idea of what actually is happening. I think David has covered some of it, so I'm going to shorten it a bit. I'm Windrush generation Mark II. My parents are actually born in Jamaica and came over. I was born here. I'm the first one in my family born here. What I'm going to do is just give you an idea of who the Windrush generation people are and talk to you about what their current position is in this country and what we're doing to try and assist people that are facing some of these challenges. So it's a whistle-stop tour, really. So my parents were born in 1920s, and when they were born, they were British citizens. When they were in their 20s or 30s, just after the war, Britain was rebuilding itself after the war and needed labor. So the way my parents tell it is, people came from all over England and carried out recruitment campaigns. Very few people came to England on spec at that time. They were invited over. A lot of my relatives had jobs to come to. And even if they didn't have jobs to come to, they knew there were plenty of jobs here. So they felt they were contributing to the country, but it was a two-way street, because most of our parents had some children, some family in the Caribbean. It was very poor, and they felt that they could make a better life for their families. So it's two-way street. England wanted them and they wanted to travel. So for what we're celebrating is a group of people that are quite intrepid. Now that might be because the country they came from was very small and their ambitions were really big and the world was wide, but they grabbed that by their hands, supported by other family members. They paid their way to come to England. Now, we all know how tough it was for our family members, which is why a lot of us ended up owning property, because we couldn't rent places to live or anything like that. However, I mean, a lot of what I remember was lots of parties, get-togethers, big community, not just of Jamaicans, but Caribbean people full stop. And they, you know, can you just imagine you're in your 30s, you've got money for the first time in your life. It was a really, really happy time for them. My parents are proud Jamaicans, very, very proud Jamaicans, but really, really proud to be living in England. For them, there's no contradiction in having allegiance to two different places at the same time. Obviously, when it's cricket, that's a different thing. But in the main, they were quite content, and they were not grateful, but they appreciated the opportunities that they had, because they couldn't have educated their children in Jamaica at the time. So they had 4 at the time. So they ended up with their 7 children, actually. So I'm part of what they came here for and what my parents would consider success. All their children are educated, and that could not have happened in Jamaica. When so this is, I just wanted to show you because I found it. This is what they came with. Can you see it's black? So this doesn't say Jamaican passport, this says British. So all along, my parents were simultaneously Jamaican and British. That's how they saw themselves. We do remember some murmurings, and it was, Powell and all that stuff. And although my parents were happy and contented, there was always something in the background for them. So they never felt secure. And, my parents were the proverbial people that had a suitcase packed, because they always felt that perhaps this was getting too good and they might be returned to the Caribbean. And they planned, if that happened, to take me along with them, even though I'm British and my 2 siblings. So what I hope I'm getting across to you is not a set of people that are coming here to beg or anything. It's a set of people that have come here to work hard and make a good life for themselves. My parents did that. They ended up reasonably wealthy. My parents are educated to 12 years old. My father was more or less illiterate. My mother sat at GCSE in the 60s. She, as I said, all our children are educated. We've got reasonable jobs, and we're doing reasonably well for ourselves. So we satisfied the covenant that most migrants have with their children. We must do better than them. And that's what we did. But as I said, in the background was this notion that we really weren't wanted. And that's even me, a person who's born in Britain. And over the years, strange things happened. Family members or family friends would go to the Caribbean and wouldn't come back. And we would be saying, I wonder what's happened there. And we'd be told that they'd decided not to come back. Now, on reflection, I think that wasn't the case, but they were embarrassed to say that they weren't allowed back into the country. Over the years that's happened. Then eventually the law changed, and we were supposed to become British citizens, my relatives. So if you think about it, there's 9 of us in my family, only 3 of us are born here. So the remainder had to pay £100 each to convert themselves from British, which they started off as, to some sort of hybrid status, back to British. So my father resisted. No, I'm not having anything to do with that. Why should I pay for a status that I was born with? Where did it go? Why did I lose it? How did this happen? And he refused. But in the end, my older sister, who was very, very anxious, because she was 12 or 13 when she got here, very anxious about her status. She insisted that everybody do it all at once. So they gathered together, which would have been several £100 at the time, which is a lot of money, and they got their status. So now we come to the position where over the last maybe 10 years, I've noticed in Southwark, I had a family friend who's said to us her husband had been deported, and we said, what had happened? And she said, well, they said he didn't belong here, and he was being forced to go and sign on at Peckham police station. So one day went to the police station. She said he said to his partner, I'm going down to the police station. She didn't hear from him for 2 days. When he called her, he said he was calling her from Jamaica and he'd been deported. And he said it was really sad. He said, really, all I need is my glasses. I can't see anything. So that he eventually came back here, but that happened. Then Theresa May, hostile environment, and it really, really ratcheted up. And I'm a solicitor, and I started to come across people who were losing their homes because they'd lost their status, they'd lost their entitlement to benefits because they couldn't prove who they were. If I explain to you about one of them, you'll get a sense of how it all works. So this person is very much like David. He arrived in this country, same age. He went to secondary school, primary school, secondary school here, and he worked a series of manual labor jobs throughout his life. Towards his 40s, he started to lose his mental health, and he needed to start making a claim, needed to make some demands on the state. So what he did was he applied for housing benefit, and that's the point at which his life started to unravel. We managed to bluster our way through, and he managed to get housing benefit, but he became so frightened and so scared by it all, he basically lost his mental health and hid away. Eventually we managed to get him some sort of entitlement to housing benefit, but his immigration status was not sorted out. He lost his mental health completely. And one of my colleagues who's really, I used to work for Cambridge House, was really concerned about him. Once the Windrush scandal broke, she actually went up to his house, and more or less forced her way in and said to him, look, we can do something for you. And she took him to Migrant Legal Centre, and they helped him sort out his immigration status. So he's one of the first that was corrected after the scandal broke, and he got his benefits and stuff. So that's him. I know of people who are David's age, came from the Caribbean, they've had children, and because their parents' status wasn't regularized, even though they were born in this country and lived here for 20, 30 years, they have been told that as their parents' status wasn't right, theirs isn't right. There's a famous story of somebody who's at the airport, and the immigration officer just tore up her passport there and then. So those people. Now, a lot of people come across this status issue at some event. So it's either you've lost your job, you're going to sign on. For a lot of the younger people, they come across it because they're applying for student loans. So that's the point at which they answer all these questions, where's your parents from, blah, 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 blah. And that's the point at which they find out that they themselves are not what they thought they were, which was British subjects. So that's how it affects people. Now, I'm going to just finish about how it affects people by just talking personally about my family members. My older sister is 64 years old, and she's a teacher for 30 years. And when this Windrush scandal broke, the first thing she did is she went and found the naturalization papers. That's to give you a sense of how insecure she felt, that a woman could have been in this country all this time. She's drawing a pension and was frightened by it all. What was worse is that my two siblings, because they were under 5, they couldn't have their own passport. So they're just footnotes in my older sister's passport. Their names are just there. And when this all broke, my brother, who's a lawyer, and my sister, who's a lecturer, both rang up my older sister independently and said, Hilda, where's the passport? Now imagine, these people already got British passport, they've had them for 30 years. And I was terrified. How can you be in a country where your status can change like that? So that's where we are, and those are snapshots. I really plan for Southwark residents to come and talk to you today, but the community that we're from are so frightened to speak about this, and also ashamed and embarrassed because they didn't think this could happen to them. Half of them were born British and now are not. Don't know what happened there. And the rest are just can't understand how they've come to be in this predicament, because this predicament is not for people who work hard and live right. So that's where we are with, so Windrush is, I've never really rated it as a day, frankly, because it came about at the same time that this Windrush scandal occurred, and I couldn't see that we were being celebrated at all. But to do so is to do a disservice to my parents, because my parents came here, worked really, really hard, and did very, very well for themselves from a more or less a standing start. So that is to be celebrated, actually. That is to be revered. They are really, really powerful people. And if you remember, for a lot of them, they were not educated people. It was a standing start. So that's where we are. Some of us are doing well. You saw the news today that education is still not right for a lot of our community. But in the main, we're quite resilient, and we really do stick together. So one of the things we're aiming to do, so this time last year, I got really, really fed up when I realized that the compensation scheme was just not working. Because that to me is like a double whammy. You've treated people really, really poorly. You've used them up for most of their economic lives. And now that when they're economically inactive, you're basically returning them to where they came from. I've found myself really, really cross in a way that as a lawyer, I tend not to be. I tend to be fairly analytical. So I was talking to a number of friends, and people I know, and we said, we've got to do something to try and help people make these applications, help people get some compensation for what was absolute madness. Sally Cllrs from Southwark Law Centre told me a statistic the other day, which really shocked me, and I didn't think I was capable of being any more shocked. She said something like 19% of people that are entitled to claim have gotten their compensation from the compensation scheme. That's just rank, frankly, really, really bad. And then the second thing is, as Kathy told me, that the scheme is coming to an end in next year. So if 19% have managed to get their claims done in over this how many odd years, do we think the remaining 80% are going to get their claims concluded in a year or so? That can't be right. So we've set up what's called a Windrush Justice Clinic. I'm sure if you look around, you'll see there's a number of groups that have gathered together to assist people make compensation claims. As far as I'm concerned, there'll never be too many of us. But our particular scheme is it's a collaboration of a variety of community organizations. So first of all, they're committed community individuals. So I'm one, and there's a couple of others as well, a lawyer, ex-lawyer, a couple of people like that. Then there's some committed community groups. One of the ones that we work with is called Claudia Jones. That's based in North London, because the demographics show us that a significant amount of people affected by this are in North London. Then we've got Southwark Law Centre, North Kensington Law Centre, and another one. Yes, and then we're working with some universities. So how it works is that the community groups feed into the university. So it's London South Bank, Westminster, and it was Greenwich, and it's going to probably be King's College. And the students there take the information, see what they can do to assist, but most often they refer the cases out to the specialists who are in the variety of law centres. We're running it that way because through law centres, because then any compensation people get, they keep it. They don't have to pay any success fees, which is what tends to happen if people go to private solicitors. So all of what they claim, they should get to keep. The main idea about the scheme is social utility, really. It's the idea that we should be able to, as a community, a wider community, assist our most vulnerable. As I've said, a lot of the original Windrush are elderly, very elderly people. If you, a lot of you don't know me, but I can talk for England. I talk to many people, and I was on a bus and I was speaking to this woman. She's from Dominica. She was in her 80s, and she told me that she's got, I've got a problem with my passport. What is it? Well, I tried to get a passport because I want to go to Dominica, and I've been told that I'm not a citizen, I'm not allowed, and that I'm going to have to go and sign on at the police station and all this stuff. She's in her 80s, never left this country. And so I was able to put her in contact with some people that could help her. So, okay, the majority of people are older, but it's coming down the chain, and it's affecting people, slightly younger people, David's generation, who perhaps didn't regularize their status. Then it's affected people like me, born and raised here. And then it's affected my children, because obviously if my status isn't right, my daughter's in her 20s, she would be affected as well. So this will just run right the way through the generations. And the idea, you know, so a lot of people don't want to apply to regularize their status because they're frightened. So a lot of them will come nowhere near compensation, because you can only get that once you've regularized your status. So that's where we are, really. So we've got this scheme going. We set it up as a sort of pilot scheme in October last year. We've seen quite a lot of people, and we think it is a runner. What we will do now is, from the new summer term, the new term, which is in September, October next year, we will start taking on new clients. I think what we should probably do is, just when we're ready to start off again, is just email people, pass information around to everybody to say that we're up and running and we're going to be taking new clients. So hopefully we can redress that woeful figure of 19%, but it's 90% of people that have popped their heads above the parapet. So I imagine that plenty won't be, so we won't get to everybody. So that's I think all I've got to say, really. I would like to say, think that I'm celebratory, but I'm not really, because I don't think we need to. I think the efforts of our parents can be celebrated, but it was definitely a joint endeavor on part of our parents and the government. And I don't think that this government's kept to its covenant at all. So I don't think I can end on an optimistic note. I've done this talk in the past, and I was able to end on an optimistic note because I was able to say that my client actually saved his property, got some money, and is living well. But since he's only one of 19%, I don't think that's much to celebrate either. So thank you very much for listening to me. I hope I haven't dragged the mood down too much.
Thank you. I don't know, I mean, the Wendy Williams review, one of the things it focuses on is how you change the culture within the Home Office. And I can't help feeling that if we somehow manage to persuade them to look at what you've just said and what David said before you, that could could actually help. And I think I'd borrow your phrase, there was always something in the background. And we just need to deal with that. Anyway, Kathy, you're also going to be saying something about the clinic, and welcome. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Can everybody hear me? Yeah, okay. So I'm going to just tell you a little bit about London South Bank University Legal Advice Clinic and our participation in the Windrush Justice Clinic. So I work at London South Bank University, the director of the Legal Advice Clinic, the university, and I have actually worked in Southwark for over 20 years because I used to be the director of Southwark Law Centre. So I was Sally Cllrs' predecessor. So I'm very familiar with Southwark. And Pamela at the beginning of the meeting was mentioning how I used to work in an advice centre in Peckham. I started my career 30 years ago in an advice centre in Peckham in the 1980s. And I was advising people on applying for British citizenship. And we had hundreds and hundreds of people come through our door, probably thousands coming through the advice sector at that time, applying for British citizenship. And most people from the Caribbean thought they were already British. And we had to explain to them how the subsequent acts and the latest act, the British Nationality Act, had actually took that right away from them and had took the right away for them to apply for British citizenship. So we were advising people at that time, and I had absolutely no idea of the impact of people's failure to apply for British citizenship. Because had I known, we were doing a lot of advertising and a lot of promotion. Obviously, we would have done a lot more in the 1980s, but how could we have guessed that we have come to this? That we have come to such a hostile environment, and also internal controls are very pernicious in this country, which has exacerbated the circumstances. So I was really shocked when I was working at Southwark Law Centre. That would have been about 7 years ago, 8 years ago, when somebody came into the clinic and said, although they'd been living in the country since the 1960s, that their nationality and their right to be in the UK was in question, because I knew at that time that it was clear that they were British, although, funny enough, my colleagues in immigration were not aware of the fact that people who came from the 1970s had indefinite leave and weren't actually required to demonstrate that they had indefinite leave to remain, because they had indefinite leave to remain because they came here at the requisite time. And so I am still appalled by the way that the Home Office behave and are still behaving, and in failing to deal with the claims promptly, and also to give adequate compensation to claimants. So that's my background. So the clinic is run by law centre, by law students at the university, under supervision of qualified lawyers and solicitors. We provide one-off advice in most areas of law, except immigration. Unfortunately, we can't advise on immigration. The university is a widening participation university, so it gives our students the opportunity to gain experience, as well as provide a free legal advice service for the general public and the community. Unfortunately, our service only operates during term time, and we only provide one-off advice. So our role in the network is to provide triage, to advise claimants about the first steps, what documents to start gathering before they see their advisor, the eligibility for the scheme, and then we would refer the person seeking advice to the most appropriate agency. So there'll be different agencies which are more appropriate depending on the circumstances. So the claimant may be making an initial claim, they may be requesting review of the compensation claim, they consider it to be too low, and they may be challenging a decision that they don't qualify for the scheme. So we will also be working in close partnership with Southwark Law Centre and other agencies, and directing the person to the most appropriate agency. And we have advised Windrush claimants already before we closed for the summer break and for exams. We advised a number of people on the Windrush scheme, and what we found were the compensation offers were abysmally low, and also that in actually applying for compensation, which the Home Office hasn't considered, people are being re-traumatised, and that is one of our concerns, as well as the scheme not being adequate, providing inadequate compensation, delays, and so on. What the Home Office hasn't taken into account is the re-traumatising of people, and certainly the people who came to our clinic all had extremely traumatic experiences as a result of their treatment by the Home Office. And that's something that we hope to address as part of the network, as well as addressing the difficulties and the adequacies of the compensation scheme. We also hope to look wider than that. We're also looking at challenging people who don't qualify for the scheme and working with our partners who are trying to widen the eligibility for the scheme. So I think if anyone's got any questions, I think there'll be time for questions later.
Kathy, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. It's depressing that you've been involved for 30 years with this, and with the sense that we've all got several years' work ahead of us as well to keep on addressing this issue. Can I turn now to Councillor Martin Seaton, who has kindly agreed to chair a discussion which is always a bit of a challenge, and it's probably even more of a challenge on Zoom. But if you can take it as, well, Martin, it's for you to decide how you wish to run it, but I'm sure there are a number of questions and points which have been sort of brought up as a result of this. And if you could, over the next 15 minutes or so, lead us through that, that would be great. And thank you again for joining us.
And thank you, John, and thank you for the contributors thus far. And I'm moved by some of the stories, and most certainly Pamela's story is very akin to my own. I'm 61. I arrived here as a baby, as a British citizen. My father came here on a plane. My mother came over on a boat. My grandfather was in the war, and he's one of those untold thousands of Caribbeans and Africans and Asians who fought in the war but were never commemorated. So yes, I'm stand bang in the middle of the Windrush experience, and we live it till today. And there is many horror stories to share with you. But I'm asked at this part of the proceedings to look at what is the way forward. What are the solutions? How can we advance this particular issue? So not only is it remains a national issue, but it's very much a local issue. And those who are afraid put their heads above the parapet, because I understand the fear. Because what we are surrounded by is a feeling of it still remains a hostile environment. We need to change that paradigm. And it is going to require people here and outside of this meeting to be a part of that change process. So I will really want to welcome Pamela's contribution, because I so relate to it absolutely completely. But the way forward, and I'm wondering if we could begin by the first steps, which is within the organizations that we belong to, how many people would you anticipate might be affected by this scandal? It is a national scandal. And I think that's the first step. It is quite obvious to me that having spoken to my own constituents, amongst the Caribbean families, African families, Asian families I speak to, there's always at least one case of someone who's yet to regularize their immigration status. Okay? And I believe that most people here would have an inkling of the numbers that we're discussing. I know that maybe we'll go back to Alice later on. The numbers, we're not sure of the numbers. Therefore, how we respond as a council is determined by the number of cases that we bring to light, I believe. Okay? So that's my first question to you all. Just using your professional experience, your community experience, what do you think the numbers are like? What are we talking about? Maybe 100, maybe 1,000, 3, 4, 10,000? What do you think the numbers? What's the scale of the problem here in this humble borough of Southwark? That's usually a useful starting point. I wonder if anyone wants to, you can either use your digital hands or okay. I see Pamela. Hello, Pamela.
I think the problem is that I'm unaware of what the minority figure is in the borough anymore, because it's completely changed. When I was at a meeting last week, they said that 10 years ago, there were 2,000 elderly-ish Caribbean people in the borough. But that, I think, relates to my parents' generation, and my mother's 90 now, so that generation is not here. But there's a whole tranche of people, my generation, from 40s to 60s, I think, that must be impacted by it. And then there's an increasing new group of younger people. As I said, because the student loans now, the questions are so intrusive, they're winkling out a lot of younger people, 20s upwards, who are applying to university, interacting with the state for the first time. And it's the first point at which they're now coming a cropper. So I don't really know, but I suspect that it must be a lot of people. And I think one of the things to do is to really start going into the places where these people will be and be comfortable. Like Claudia Jones, it's a community group, so people can talk without much fear there.
Okay.
So I would say you try your churches, try your places. David is obviously in contact with a lot of people that are closer to that community, because nobody's speaking to any strangers because they're too frightened, and they now have experience of people who have been deported, because it was a threat before.
Okay.
They know of people. So
if I may, Pamela, I hear you, and I'm going to return back. We will return to the stats for Southwark in terms of the student population for primary school, which I understand is around 45,000 or so, but it's around that figure, of which just over 80% are Black or ethnic minorities, and of that percentage, around half or so are of Caribbean or origins. Okay, and then you can begin to extrapolate what the figures might be based upon the average size of families. I saw Cedric's hand put up, or David, or did I see Cedric first of all? Did I see Cedric? Yes, Cedric, and I'll go to David.
Give it to David because
okay,
because of his. I won't say it at this moment.
I haven't heard from you, Cedric, before. Go ahead, Cedric. I've not heard from you.
Okay.
We've not heard from you, Cedric.
No. Okay. I just only wanted to say, firstly, thank for the I may have missed the start of the meeting because I had another meeting. So I joined 15 minutes later, but I just only wanted to say, firstly, thank you to the council for getting that letter out to the Home Office and the signatories that were attached to that, because that's an important statement. And also importantly, its content, and hopefully we'll get a response. I think my concern is if we don't get a response, what is the position and what do we do next? So I think also more importantly, to answer your question, Martin, with regards to numbers, I think whether it's one or whether it's half a dozen or a dozen, the issue is that in the letter that was sent, the stats speak out itself. Over 2,000 individuals actually did make a claim, and only 600 actually got a response. So there's your figures already there, Martin.
Yep.
In terms of those individuals who perhaps felt let down already by the fact that they went through a structure, a system, where their claims were made. Now, whether they made bad claims in terms of how they completed those forms, or they were just totally ignored, those are the kind of questions that we need to be asking from the local authority perspective, but also more importantly, from our own sort of records, what we know. I won't go into sort of my own kind of concerns in relation, well, I will go into my concerns. I think when we talk about the hostile government or the hostile Britain that we live under, I think we also have to remember there's also a hostile Southwark, because there's communities of Black Windrush residents in this borough who are also facing issues of disparities, issues of feeling left out, not listened to. I can speak about Elms House. Ealing House, sorry. But where there's a batch of people of my parents' generation, because like David, this is my father's Black, or Pamela,
Yep.
That's my father's passport. It's cut now, it's not valid. But it's interesting in terms of that he had this pass, or this bearer of this pass was able to pass freely without let or hindrance, and to be offered every assistance and protection in this country.
Yep.
By this passport, this British, this so-called Black passport. Those same people are here in Southwark. We can go and talk to them, but they won't want to talk to the council because they feel let down already by the council about Ealing House in terms of where they want it to go and what they want to do with that generation, that legacy, Martin.
Mm-hmm. Can I just intervene with you at this point of time? And the Ealing House situation is one I was going to allude to later on, because yes, it came about as a result of the community come together back in the 80s. We secured the urban aid money to secure that building for the community for eternity, as it were. But the council holds the freehold, and the story around the Ealing House is a story that we need to tell. But if I may suggest, Cedric, you are right, and it's very much on our minds. But I'm keen to pursue the issue of Windrush from the point of view of providing qualitative information for people like Councillor Anna MacDonald, who holds the portfolio, the qualitative portfolio. So she's fully informed both of the community's view on these key subject areas, okay? And most importantly, while she is receiving information from officers as to the scale of the issue, it's for the community to communicate to her what is the genuine scale of the issue, both in terms of elderly, middle-aged, and young people who are affected by the Windrush scandal.
Sorry.
I estimate it to be up to 15 to 20,000 people.
But
I want to further substantiate.
Sorry, Martin. Ealing House is important. It's symbolic of the mistrust and the confidence that the Black community of that generation will feel with regards to the hard work that the Law Centre has put in place. Yep. It won't mean anything if we don't start showing, as a local authority, our commitment to that community. if we're not going to show it, then you might as well forget it. Because if you use that name, if you use the Windrush name, you're using it purely to do what has traditionally happened in terms of the savior white horse rescue game. Let's not play that anymore.
Good. Right, Cedric, we're all on the same page, and that particular message has now been got across. It's recorded. This meeting is being recorded. That message has been got across. And if you don't mind now, I'm going to move on to David, but thank you for that really important contribution. Ealing House is a focal point for the African Caribbean community here in Southwark and should remain as such. Very good. David.
Just a quick input, just to say that I thoroughly endorse what Cedric said, and I think it will be an indictment on Southwark Council if they don't actually commit to making sure that the legacy of Caribbean people who've lived here for decades in Southwark and have worked hard to build up the NHS, London Transport, are not taken care of and listened to. So that's number one. Going to Pamela. Again, I agree with you. We need to get this information out to those networks. Councillor Alice MacDonald mentioned the Golden Oldies. It's networks like that we need to make sure that actually get that information, and maybe even, I don't know if your service is, you can outreach that, get those services into those spaces where people feel that they can trust those individuals, and it's a safe place, because that's the only way that we're going to stop, this kind of chronic type of process that has gone on. Because you are right, Pamela, people of sort of my generation, my children, and perhaps my grandchildren, we don't sort it out and stop that right now, it's going to continue for decades on. All right, so that's all I want to say. But any help I can give you in trying to identify some of those networks, getting the message out, it needs a real big marketing campaign as well. It really does. And I don't know whether or not you've got the resources, but if you haven't got the resources, maybe Southwark Council, as part of that commitment that Cedric mentioned, can try and find some resources to sort of help this cause.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, David, for that. That's very helpful. Very helpful. I wonder if there are other contributions. And we're looking at the scale. Yeah, Councillor Alice MacDonald. Yeah.
Okay. I think the other thing, and thank you, it's really important to hear the contributions. And I think, as everyone says, finding the networks, and the letter came together quite late in the day, and it went through the BCS groups. I'm sure there are lots of other people who would have supported those calls. I think we, as I said, we have got a kind of very specific commitment to campaign, particularly on the compensation scheme, so I can definitely look at what assistance there is on comms, because I agree with you, we have to kind of raise visibility. Sally shared with me the stat, 2 people died in Southwark whilst they were waiting for their compensation case to be resolved. It's just an absolute scandal, and I didn't know that. And the only reason is as Pamela said, Windrush Day has become actually a day of campaigning, but it shouldn't be once a year that it's okay, this is a moment to kind of put lots of focus on this. It's how do we then continue the momentum? And I think it's great that you've got the Justice Clinic up, and I'm really up for if it's helpful, maybe with Dave and others, kind of convening a bit of a regular kind of campaigning group to look at how do we keep this issue in the public eye, because as Cedric says, who knows if we'll get a response. I know that Neil Coyle's put a number of parliamentary questions down as well next week to try and also get that information, but we have to look at if they're not going to give us that information, which they may not, how do we get it ourselves? But then, to other people's points, how do we address the issue of trust? Because I'm sure I couldn't go in and have that conversation, but I want to be able to use what I can in my role to help kind of unlock some of the action that we need. And Cedric, I'm happy to also pick up an Ealing House with you. It sits across a number of people's portfolios, but I hear you loud and clear, and you're right, you can't do one thing and not do the other stuff that is undermining trust with different communities. So I'm really happy to have that conversation as well out of this meeting. But yeah, I'll stop there.
Thank you. I'll go to Kathy Duplis, and then I'll go back to Pamela. Kathy, yes, I saw you signal.
I did, yeah. Martin, I wanted to support Cedric and David in terms of Ealing Community Association. I worked fantastically with Orbin during the pandemic. We reached communities and he reached community with culturally appropriate food that we could not have provided through Southwark Pensioners Centre. And I know that there are lots and lots of older people who he has contact with.
How many? Can I ask you how many?
That was going to be my next point.
Right. Yes, go ahead.
Martin, I appreciate that, you know, the council deals in facts and figures. It makes it easier to campaign and to request support. And of course, local government funding comes through the local settlement, which is based on figures. But what we're talking about here is fear.
Yeah.
We're talking about fear. People not wanting to put their head above the parapet, as you describe it, because they have seen the stories. The press has played to the scandal, but it hasn't played enough to how utterly people's lives have been destroyed. So I appreciate that we need to try and get some figures, but we need to be sensitive to the fact that it might be quite difficult to get those figures because it has destroyed people's lives. And I think what Pamela said about the second generation, those who are trying to get into university, etc., it might be easier to try and reach out to some of those. But actually, I think there are alternative ways of gathering that information. We could ourselves ask the universities, couldn't we, give us some broad figures. They will know who's been rejected, yeah? They may not want, they can't give us the personal details, but there will be other ways. Social services will have some idea about the older folk who are in residential care homes. And those people may think, they're anything like my dad, oh, it's just a bit of paperwork, I'm a British citizen, I'm not sorting that out. If it wasn't for my mum, I wouldn't have got my naturalisation paper. If it had been left down to my dad, I wouldn't have got it, absolutely, yeah? But there'll be a lot of people in residential care homes, etc., and some work can be done to talk to them and to bring it to the attention of their children, because it will be their grandchildren who do not achieve the lives that the likes of Pamela, David, Cedric and myself have achieved here.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that. I'll go to Pamela, then I'll go to Grace.
I'm not going to say anything more after this, I promise, but can I just say...
Your contributions are very helpful, Pamela. Don't worry.
No, but I've been known to hog a space. Clock is ticking.
Yes.
Is that right, Kathy?
Yeah.
Catherine?
Yeah.
The clock is ticking, and we can't spend our time collecting figures and facts and figures because we will have eaten into the time if there is a deadline. I've heard some talk about asking to extend the deadline for making these claims so that you can allow more people to make them. But obviously, I work in a voluntary sector. I didn't say so before, but I'm the director of Greenwich Housing Rights, and you know, I'm forever making applications for resources. Resources is a big thing here. You need to be funding people who have good access to these communities, who can carry out a quick piece of research to beat the ground and not find out how many, find these people and try to offer them some service. Now, part of the problem is it's intractable because those people haven't sorted out their immigration status. So there's no point applying for compensation.
Yeah.
And there's no finance to assist people to regularize their status for some aspects of it, if I understand it correctly. Some of the immigration lawyers will correct me if I'm wrong, but this is my understanding, is that there's a lack of legal aid and lack of funding to help people. So people, they know that, they're not stupid. So they know that there's a problem in getting assistance. So why put your head above this parapet and face all these horrors? So there's two things really, is some sort of resource to help people regularize their status, some sort of funding to help people sort out their claims, but also perhaps some sort of campaigning to extend this deadline, because 19%, well, as I said, the 80% can't be making their claims in the next year or so, can they?
Thank you, Pamela. No, you're right. I'm just making note of what you said. Legal aid. I understood the legal beagles. In fact, you are a legal beagle. I understood that legal aid was now available for Windrush applicants.
I'm a housing solicitor.
Right.
Sally or Kathy can tell you what the true position is.
Can I just confirm? I understood that was the case. Maybe Sally or someone can respond.
No, unfortunately not, Martin. It's still not available.
Wow.
For most immigration things. Most of immigration law is out of scope of legal aid. So that's why there's a kind of pretty much a crisis around that.
Thank you. Thank you, Sally. Can I go to Grace? Grace Tamuka? Yeah, you're mute. You're on mute. Sorry, Grace, you're on mute. In fact, John, can I just double check how much time I have? Is it another 5 minutes or so? Would that be right?
Yes, I'm just looking. Yes, I think 5 minutes and then round it up. Okay. Sally, you could say something at the very end. Is that okay?
That's fine. That's fine.
Thank you.
Thank you, John. Good. Thank you, John. Grace, yes, go ahead.
Councillor. I just want to say that obviously I know quite a few people on the call, and I just want to say that I work in the community in the council, and if there's anything that I can do, that we can do, because obviously we've got a lot of networks and I know a lot of people here, so obviously it's Southwark, but just let us know, because it's because people are traumatized, and there's lots of fear and there's lots of suspicion, and I think that we need to work together. And I know that Kathy and I know quite a few people, you know, Sally and others here, you know, please let us know what we can do to help and support you from the council. You know, that's all I've got to say. Thank you, Councillor.
Perfect, perfect. If there are no other contributions at this point, I'll go to Sally, because it's really useful to hear from the Law Centre. Thank you for this session. It's incredibly important. And as the general theme here is that the current number of cases is grossly understated. Okay, and I know from my network that there are significant numbers of people, both within my immediate networks and as linked networks, who are not coming forward, but they do not believe that the hostile environment has ended. They believe it is still the case, and they do believe that the state will move against them if they show their heads. What a way to live! What a way to live! Anyway, Sally.
Thank you, Martin, and thank you to everybody for. I think it's been a terrific discussion tonight, and I hope it's just the start of something. We sort of organised this a little bit late in the day because we thought it was really important to do something to mark Windrush Day, but taking Pamela's point, it would be great just to have it as a celebration, but actually what we're dealing with is the reality of the, as everybody's kind of, the speakers have explained, the reality of the situation for people. So in a small way, we're hoping that the Law Centre, working in partnership with Kathy at the London South Bank, to be able to provide some support. We've got a very small amount of initial funding, and we're kind of looking for, to extend that. So we're hoping to launch the support and with some comms September, October time. But what I think we want to work in partnership, and what we want from the community, from David at Reach and the partners at Reach, and for community activists like Cedric, and from people like Grace work in the community. I think the numbers will be great. I think it would be really fantastic if we can get some information back about the numbers affected in Southwark, because that will help us, with that kind of targeting and how we plan the service. But I think more than that, from what people have said, it's actually just building trust. And if it's just even a smaller number of people that we can help, we need to work with the community to build that, to build that trust, to build that confidence of people to be able to come forward. And hopefully at the Law Centre, we will be able to sort of help with some of the immigration issues as well as the compensation issues, because I think, as people have said, it goes kind of hand in hand. You need to make sure that the immigration issues are sorted out as well. So I really like the idea. I think Alice's idea of some sort of campaign group, that this becomes the start something, rather than, you know, this is, oh, we just had a one-off event for Windrush Day, wasn't that great? It's not great. The situation isn't great for people, and, you know, we need to, as somebody, I think it was David or Pamela said, we need to stop it now. We need to do something now, and so that if we can come together and we can kind of maybe think about having that campaign group, that would be, you know, that'd be really good. In the meantime, whilst we're still kind of like getting our kind of project together and launching it in the autumn, you know, we will kind of be able to deal with inquiries, you know, at the law centre as well. So, you know, it's not, you know, we'll be starting properly then, but we still kind of like we'll deal with inquiries up till that point. Flo, I don't know if you could just put that inquiries at Southwark into the chat, please. For some reason my chat's not working. So yeah, that's all I was saying. Just thank you everybody, and, you know, thanks for a really brilliant discussion.
Thank you very much indeed. I'll hand back to John. I'll just say before I hand back to John that I'll be more than happy to ensure that the campaign group gets off the ground and it's sustained, not for a few months or a few years, for as long as it takes. Okay, it is vitally important. There is a large number of people out there who are currently not being represented. We need to change that situation here in Southwark. And I commit that we will do that in Southwark. I'll hand back to John. Thank you.
Sorry, I think Catherine wants to say something.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I can see her.
I missed Catherine. I'm really sorry, Catherine. I didn't see you.
No, that's all right. Yeah, thank you. Thank you to all the speakers. I just wanted to say that the deadline for putting in a claim for Windrush compensation scheme is the 2nd of April 2023. Yeah. Actually 2 years away, which isn't a lot of time when you consider how complex the claims are, and also that people will have to gather a considerable amount of evidence in support of their claims. So I just wanted to clarify that. And the other thing I just wanted to point out, although there is an organisation that assists people with the compensation scheme, it's not independent advice and it's not legal aid. And they're working in partnership with the Home Office. So a lot of people will obviously not have confidence. I'm not saying that they're not an appropriate organisation, but a lot of people will not have confidence to go to that organisation because they're not independent of the Home Office, and they're very tied to the Home Office. And considering so many people are frightened, quite rightly, to contact the Home Office because of the hostile environment, and that's why it's really important that people have independent legal advice.
Kathy, thank you very much. Martin, you said it all at the end. I mean, it's great to have had this evening and to have the engagement of so many people and the clear engagement and determination that is shown by the council through the councillors' involvement. Thank you again, Alice, and the council staff who have been supportive, and I know will be sort of supportive of the work. And yes, Kathy, 2 years is not a very long time, and therefore getting things underway and providing as much assistance as is possible, recognizing that immigration and that sort of advice is under such pressure. But I hope that this evening has given the clear message that Southwark is going to be doing all it can to address this, and we can worry about why we don't get a satisfactory answer from Priti Patel in a few weeks' time. And I think there must be ways of making sure. Well, I hope that that the Wendy Williams review and our work will help do what's most important, which is to change a culture, and most importantly, because it's really depressing to think that there are people living in fear of putting their heads above the parapet, that there is something that there's always something in the background. We really do need to do something to address that. So thank you all. And I'm sure that in our different ways, we will all be working closely together over the next few weeks and months, and this is a great start. So thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Good night. Good night. Good night.
Good night. Thank you.
Thank you. Good night, everybody. Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.